This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal I felt out of control, so I'm sharing this to gain control over my story. This story is long as it spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to read through. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How were they fighting in less than a day? I smiled and told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked, and the door opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1X since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was odd. We were both in our 20s, of course I drank alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate. As I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and lisp, I assumed she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claims to not have hobbies or friends, but I figured that, since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was doing a good deed. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along with my roommate. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison. I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. One night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed, and she hurriedly put on her sandals and neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle. Nellie silently followed closely behind me. Eventually, I found everything I needed, but Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt, and he looked in my bags, confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie, for the 4th time, as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone, or with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything contrary. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only other person with a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business. But that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again, toilet paper, hair, and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic. So I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please? I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me, and sat with me in class. For the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet. I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie. Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you. I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet. As I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. Nellie stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly, sweet, rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet. So, for 2 weeks, I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later, coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club, and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh and part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me scented candles for Christmas. When I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. My January exams were online and pretty easy. So, I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much. So, despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things I could talk with Nellie about. Attempting to break the awkward silence, I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot, actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against it. I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt, and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded. I had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from Sri Lanka and I apologized, even though she definitely told me she was from Sri Lanka. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around." "You'll be scared? But I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me and I didn't want to be rude, so I said I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a disingenuous maybe. Nellie leaned back, slowly rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. The next day I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m., I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." I pressed send. I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to her shower room next to the bathroom. But Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her. So I laid down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, then called again while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over again. The shock of it made me stumble back onto my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. The cockroach screamed. "Why do this to me?" "Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation," the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. "You are the funny cockroach." I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had happened before going to bed. That night, I barely slept. I was too scared. I awoke the next day, anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles, and inspect each row as she passed. I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eyeline as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up in a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my thing. Nellie asked where I was going and I lied to her, saying I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was. So, I went home for lunch, and as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. "You weren't at the cafe." Nellie's eyes darted up to me. She was looking at a knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid she'd use the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to fuck off. I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I'd be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I needed to get away. I went to Reagan's apartment, as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam. So I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor, leading beneath our table where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it in the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school's safety board and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen in Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me, and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her and thought that moving would stop her obsession with me. I was incredibly misguided. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nellie incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follow requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any Nellie-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't fucking sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a cart, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle, and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle, and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with a crowd toward campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words can't explain how terrified I was. Nellie let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. A look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run, and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. After a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend. So, Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie crap. I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the disciplinary board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I reported was factual, but they didn't think Nellie had any malicious intent. So, they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion and asked them what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names. The school put us all in danger. Yet, they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her action. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care. They were going to prioritize a predator. So, with no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order. They never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates and in them new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie. They looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge. A natural result of the boiling rage I felt, now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way she made me suffer. I know if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering no matter what I write. I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off of Nellie. I have daily night terrors. I don't go into new situations, I don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year. But, despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on.